Chapter 24 Hedge of Protection. By 1978, it had been 4 years since Stan was treated at Stanford University, and he was making good progress. We talked on the phone every week. He would call to keep me updated on his health and what was going on in California. He always started off with a couple of jokes or a funny story and had me laughing before he talked about his cancer treatments. Not wanting me to worry, every call was lighthearted and fun. He had accepted God's free gift of salvation as a young person and knew that's where he would spend eternity, so he wasn't afraid of dying. Since developing cancer, he had witnessed and shared his testimony with many people. With every call, he'd tell me his doctors were encouraged by his progress and believed he was getting better. However, this call was different. The conversation didn't start out with jokes or funny stories. There was a touch of sadness in his voice as he said, "Joe, I have something to tell you." I could tell things were not right. I tried to conceal the tightness in my throat as tears welled up. "What's going on, Stan?" I tried to sound normal. "What's wrong?" It was too late. The tears were streaming down my face, and there was a catch in my voice. "Please tell me." He took a moment before continuing. "Joe, I don't know how to say this, but it won't be long now." He was solemn, sounding choked up. "Joe, I'm going to that promised land." There was no stopping my tears. "Who told you that? You told me the doctor said you were doing better. Who told you that?" Russ came up behind me and held my shoulders as I softly cried. Stan's voice got a little chipper as he replied, "Well, everyone at church is going to the Holy Land, so Peggy and I decided we'd go too." In the background, Peggy called out, "I told him that was a terrible joke to pull on you." It was, but not unexpected. Stan was always full of some kind of mischief and goofy stunts. During the summer of 1978, Stan arranged a secret visit for Kim, Jen, and me. He paid for our flight to California without telling anyone. When we arrived, I left the girls at his house and he drove me to a grocery store not far from our folks. After dropping me off, he picked up Mom and brought her back to the store, where I would surprise her as she walked by. Although I walked past them a couple of times, Mom never looked up. This was not working. So I stopped my brother in the aisle and asked, "Do you know where the post office is?" "Why, yes," Stan replied, pointing to his left. "It's right next door. You can't miss it." Mom ignored us. When we passed each other on the next aisle, I asked, "Where can I find the milk?" "You just passed it in the dairy section," Stan said. Mom continued to stay focused on her grocery list. The third time I approached them was in front of the bread counter. I asked, "Do you know where the bread is?" Stretching both palms out, he pointed to the shelf directly in front of us and exclaimed, "Right here." Mom frowned as she wondered who this girl was flirting with her son. It wasn't till she looked up that she realized it was me. She gasped, "Jolene!" She threw her arms around me and we both cried. We hadn't seen each other in over 2 years. It was a wonderful surprise and so typical of Stan. His unexpected caper was the highlight of my visit. 2 weeks later, I was packing for our flight home while Peggy and their son, Andy, were visiting with us at my folks'. My brother, Jim, and his wife, Carolyn, had been kind enough to loan me one of their cars during our visit. It was late, so I told Stan I would give his family a ride home. However, I was nervous as we would be driving down dark streets, and I knew gangs would be roaming that time of night. We were in an unsavory part of town when I approached a red light near a busy intersection. The 3 little ones were playing freely in the back seat, as there were no seatbelt laws in 1978. My car was barely crawling along as I inched towards a car on my left. I intended to make a right-hand turn when a gun appeared out the back window, pointed toward the house on our right. I was almost in his line of fire, so I slammed my foot down to stop the car, but instead I hit the gas. We lunged forward into the intersection just as a semi-truck was barreling through. He crushed the front of our car, tossing us around like a tin can, and smashed the trunk in as we spun. We tumbled to and fro as the car was thrown onto a front lawn, where we came to an abrupt stop. As the truck driver ran over to check on us, I looked toward the gunman's car and was surprised to see they hadn't left. Instead, the driver of the vehicle, a large African-American woman, was running toward us. I got out of the car as she reached me. Holding my face in her hands, she asked, "Are you okay, baby?" I answered slowly, bewildered and shaken, "I think so." Then she asked, "What happened?" I started to cry as I stuttered, There was a gun." A shocked look crossed her face and tears welled up. Grabbing me, she wrapped her warm arms around my trembling body and said, "I'm so sorry, baby. I'm so sorry. That were my son. He were just playing with a toy." Surveying the damage, we looked at each other and wept. Other than a couple of bruises, no one was injured. The center section of the car didn't have a scratch. It had to be the Lord throwing a hedge of protection around us. There's no other explanation. Jim and Carolyn picked up Peggy and Andy and were justifiably upset. Their car was totaled. Normally, that would be the worst of it, except they had just dropped the insurance on it. They had planned on selling the car for $600, a good paycheck back then. Dad picked us up, and we went back to his house. Stan was already calling on the phone when I walked in the door. I was sobbing and could hardly tell him what happened. He talked with me for an hour in his calm, soothing way. He explained that what I believed to be a terrible nightmare wasn't a nightmare at all. It was actually an amazing story of ironic circumstances that, when surrounded by these quirky events, turned out to be the most terrific story anyone could have happened to them. He continued, "But guess what, Joe? It didn't just happen to anyone. It happened to you, you lucky bum. I wish it had happened to me, so I would have this miraculous story which would fascinate everyone." I knew this was his typical Stanley manner, turning a tragic event into something humorous. So, as usual, he had me laughing before we hung up. He was right. It was amazing. We should have been killed or at least seriously injured, but we didn't have a scratch. God's providential protection was on us, and we were so thankful for his loving care. I didn't tell Russ until we got home. I wanted to tell him in person. I was troubled as I had totaled Jim and Carolyn's car, and we couldn't afford to pay them. Once Russ knew I was okay, the money didn't faze him. He said, "Don't worry about it. They knew the risk when they dropped their insurance and loaned you the car." In that moment, I was so thankful not only for a God who watched over us, but for an understanding husband. But let all who take refuge in you be glad. Let them ever sing for joy. Spread your protection over them, that those who love your name may rejoice in you. Surely, Lord, you bless the righteous. You surround them with your favor as with a shield. Psalms 5:11 and 12.